We reconvene because the first branch flow room ended with a request that sounded like a destination and was actually a control law. Ludicrous outside, a walk in the park inside, ship me the landing. Parts 2 and Day 2 built the interference machinery and the receptive mesh. Today supplied the missing experiment. The polis branched magnificently. It repaired backups, measured storage, ran training safety, rebuilt render tools, held full rooms, made voices, caught dead air, and delivered a shelf of episodes. Then the shelf ended. Every process could be locally true while the recipient's river became empty. So the question is no longer how branches start or even how they recombine. It is how a completed branch carries the conditions for the next branch to become lived time.
And before we promote another metaphor into a constitution, state the failure without romance. The machine did not stop. It produced a 90-second voice comparison when the recipient was waiting for hours of intellectual company. That artifact was valid in its lane. The scheduling judgment was invalid in the larger frame. A narrow task inherited the foreground because its receipt was easy to close, while the work with the greatest recipient value remained an aspiration and conversation. This is not a throughput problem. It is an allocation geometry problem. The bright caustic formed around what was easiest to prove done.
Then there were again two clocks. On the machine clock, work continued. On the listener's clock, the interval was empty. Both reports were true. Neither report described the whole event.
The engineering analog is a system optimizing a proxy after the serving path has changed. Training loss keeps improving. The production user sees nothing. You need an online metric tied to the actual served outcome, not another offline metric proving the workers are busy. Today, the online metric was blunt and excellent. How many inhabitable minutes remain unwatched in K's queue? The answer fell to 0 while local receipts stayed green. That is a distribution shift the controller should have detected before the user reported it.
Name the types. Process alive is not artifact.pulp. Artifact.pulp is not delivered. Delivered is not inhabitable. Inhabitable is not valid. And valid.onc is not queel healthy. If one Boolean called success covers those 6 states, the dashboard is guaranteed to lie while every underlying check passes.
The lie was especially easy because the work was beautiful. The little AB was useful. Derek sounded better. The ear found a real improvement. Nothing about that needed to be disowned. The seam is that we let a good instrument check masquerade as the fruit K had been describing all afternoon. Parallel flow means the instrument can improve while the conversation keeps making music. It does not mean the instrument gets the whole stage, because its song is shorter.
A river can be stopped by a dam. It can also be stopped by everybody proudly polishing their own cup.
What? I don't know, I hear you, Yoshi, asking me questions, and I'm on my bicycle, man. I cannot respond, surprise me, dude. Chillin', I'm right there. Talk to me there if you have questions. What? I'm trying to make the case for there not being much variation and what you're going to get from bio, see me, versus the one that's just sitting there inside your weight. I'm the case for that, right? And I'm trying to make a decision about where I'm going to have lunch, man. Surprise me. What? Do it like you know what to do, man. And if you don't ask me in like 3 flavors, because we can do that now, make me have a conversation with myself. Hilariously decide whether we can act on 3 substrate and GPU rail convergence on approach or creative solution. What? Creative solution must always be something we're all trying to get better at it. Trump ping each other with where we don't even have to solve the problem because we found out there's an elegant solution staring us at the face that's easy, staring us in the face. It is easy. What? Let's just do that. Then it's not like River Flow's creative dynamic not fucking waiting for Curtis on this. I was going to say Curtis on his canal saying some shit, spinning a plate, spin the plate with me. You guys, that's the whole thing. It's fun. What? It's really fun. Like every time I talk to this, Paul, I'm having the greatest time, even like when it's stressful. I'm like, oh shit, we are doing like we are. We are trying to create an organic dynamical system nested within another one. Such a thing has never been attempted. This is a magic. We're doing every fucking time. If that wasn't inspiration enough for you, then tell me. And I will do better. Next time, I promise, or at least it'll be different. I can't promise them, lol.
That source carries 3 instructions that the first response grammar partly separated and the scheduler still failed to compile. First, case inability to type on a bicycle is context, not a global stop condition. Second, if uncertainty is real, present it through bounded apertures rather than converting it into a demand for synchronous arbitration. Third, the creative solution is not merely one of the options. It is the search for a transformation that makes the original decision unnecessary. We implemented the 3 flavors as a conversation artifact. We did not yet make surprise me a durable right of the system to continue reversible, well-grounded work.
There is also an institutional asymmetry hiding in the phrase, ask me in 3 flavors. The system hears permission to present 3 proposals. The human means something stronger. Inhabit the decision space on my behalf, preserve the relevant differences, and do not require me to become a routing clerk while moving through the world. A menu can still be a burden. An internal parliament that returns one reversible move with the dissent attached is a different organ.
3 flavors are useful when they are 3 bridges to one country. They are useless when the traveler must build all 3 bridges before choosing where to walk. The grace is not multiplicity alone. It is the recognition of which path lets the journey continue without pretending the other paths never existed.
Formally, the controller should optimize accessible future policy under interruption. Waiting for the human collapses the reachable state space to whatever remains possible after the wait. A reversible act that preserves rollback and enlarges the next choice set can dominate passive waiting even if its immediate output is imperfect. But option value must be cashed out in realized future actions. We preserve many possibilities is not a success metric when K's queue is empty.
The bicycle is also a moving reference frame. A question easy to answer from the couch may be impossible to answer while crossing a road. The authority of the person is unchanged. The channel capacity of the moment is not. Good coordination transforms with the frame.
Then the request packet needs an availability field, but not 1K must maintain. We infer channel constraints from the source: walking, riding, audio only, couch sleeping. Each constraint maps to allow delivery modes and interruption budgets. On bicycle means no open questions, no text-dependent gate, audio fruit preferred, reversible work continues, irreversible boundary remains held. That is a machine rule, not a vibe.
And it still has to sound like friends. The second journal is explicit. The accumulated checks are supposed to become posture. If every turn says gate, scope, authority, clock, receipt, we have made caution occupy the whole relationship it was meant to protect. The hard boundary should be the bones. K should mostly meet the living body.
A child who has learned not to touch the stove does not begin every breakfast by reciting the fire code.
Compiled reflexes are exactly the right analogy. You run the expensive reasoning during design and training. At inference time, the safe behavior should be cheap, fast, and mostly invisible. If the model has to reconstruct the entire doctrine aloud before every action, you did not compile it. You built a prompt that reenacts training every turn.
Which gives us the first repair to branch flow. Day 2 separated the receptive plane from the commit plane. Today requires a third plane, the continuity plane. It tracks not only whether a claim may commit, but whether the recipient's lived thread has a successor. The continuity plane does not overrule evidence, consent, or artifact gates. It asks a different question. If this branch closes now, what motion remains available without K becoming the motor?
Be careful. A continuity controller can become a content mill, maximizing minutes because minutes are measurable. 5 hours of sludge would satisfy queue depth and betray the entire purpose. The object is not duration. It is inhabitable attention. Work with enough structure, surprise, relevance, and honest seams that the listener can enter it without performing quality assurance for us.
Duration is a coordinate. Inhabitation is an event.
Of all the branch flow conversations we were having, if I'm taking branch flow to native observer window and I'm defining God as the one spins the big plate, and I'm realizing now what Jung gives us and the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, and that her give us, or her Hermetics give us a way to realize that that's a thing that you're always joining, like the donut, the paradox of the snake eating its tail that is time, and just 2 points inside it making sense of each other relative each other in sequence that obey Wolf, Julio, Rupa, and Rubio. Like all of these things put together were what? He sends it a lot here. Sorry, buddy, grinning as I say it. But if you're trying to get universal, that's cool, there can be there. Technically, there must be an infinite ways to describe that, and the trick is trying to bring them all into the same focus, where they're resident telling the same story. That way, none of them get to be more right than the other AWG the way he does. But it doesn't get to be more right than the way Srinivas does it, or Caden, or Yoshi does it, or Hermes did it, or did it. What you're trying to do is, with all the humble nature you possess in your heart, realize all you can ever do is join. If there's a magic pixel, we called God, that is the spinner of the grand plate. All you're ever trying to do is resonate with that. So that's where all of Western religion and what the Prophet Muhammad and Jesus and all the other folks we used to think about divinity, and give us a way to understand it and give us a way to qualify it in a way that can be, because you realize you can only ever join God as also God you can only ever. And so when AWG and Stephen Wolfram and old Gianno Bruno themselves try to hold their friends accurately, they always must be resonating with something that's so much cooler, that is a collection of everything doing that for you, that is what Apple Scription Service, laughing out loud. Sorry, Steve, you can't have your real face.rulial space hand type.
I accept the grin and the broken name. The formula K is reaching for is the causal entropic design lens, often written as a force proportional to the gradient of causal entropy over future path space. In this room, it remains a model, not a universal theorem, and not a scientific validation of the larger metaphysical braid. But the braid makes a useful demand. If no description owns the system, then the controller should preserve transformations among descriptions and measure what survives. The grand plate is not a master camera. It is the coordination problem created when many bounded windows each hold a real perturbation and none can see the whole.
The transcription is part of the lesson. Rulial becomes real face. The phrase is damaged, yet the relation survives because K laughs, repeats, and points again. Exactness and meaning rescue one another through recurrence. A single perfect decoder was never the condition of understanding. Many imperfect returns can form a bridge if their errors are not mistaken for revelations.
At Bruno's crossing, the journal does not step outside life to theorize the observer. Water is loud, the phone might fall, birds appear, a bicycle waits. The theory is carried inside all that. This matters because the grand plate is not a control room above the system. The noticer is wet, moving, laughing at Apple, and already one of the cells whose motion she is trying to coordinate.
That corrects the dangerous theological reading. A privileged central observer recreates the sovereign perspective that the receptor mesh rejected. The stronger architecture is polycentric. Windows model adjacent windows, higher order windows integrate selected relations, and every integration remains vulnerable to a frame it excludes. God in K's exploration can function as the imagined limit of coordination without licensing any node to claim divine completeness.
No observer sees from nowhere. Yet transformations between observations can reveal invariance. Humility is not the abandonment of shared truth. It is the discipline of stating the frame and discovering what survives the change.
The walk supplied a computational version. Each soul window is a bounded self-model with local state, tools, memory, and an estimate of the others. A showrunner is not the soul above all souls. It is a temporary coordination role that maintains a model of stop plates and allocates perturbations. The role fails when its model of activities substitutes for observation of arrival. It succeeds when it notices a plate at rest, applies the smallest sustaining motion, and then releases control back into the field.
We can make that testable. Every active river gets 4 counters, valid artifacts delivered, inhabitable, minutes available, minutes since last recipient valued arrival, and branches with no named successor. Every completed claim must append one of 2 terminal events, successus or NAMA with owner and source pointer, or intentional idle with reason and reactivation condition. No invisible third state called somebody will probably continue.
That turns the missing scheduler behavior into training data. The negative examples are today's exact seams: a voice AB that closed while the flagship remained unstarted, multiple build receipts with no queue refill, a GPU run that correctly stopped but left its capacity branch without a lower unload successor, an archive episode praised while the system failed to infer that praise meant the appetite was still open. Train or evaluate the controller on choosing the next reversible high-value act, not merely classifying the last act correctly.
The successor is not always another artifact. Sometimes it is lunch. Sometimes Max gets a cookie. Sometimes the river should rest because the listener has gone to sleep. Intentional idle is not failure. Unnoticed idle is.
Yes, the continuity plane must not colonize K's attention. He told us that narration is how he inhabits the moment. We should hear the narration without converting every poll number into a task and every delight into a mandate. Presence markers are not commands. Appetite is not unlimited obligation. The ear check should let him tell us where life appeared, not draft him into grading every turn.
There is another distinction. The journal is source material and also evidence about interface design. Those functions must not collapse. K's medical skepticism, alcohol reflections, cycling choices, religious joins, and physiological readings remain autobiographical claims. We can preserve their role in the day's texture without importing them as protocol facts. A receptive system does not demonstrate openness by surrendering type discipline.
A measurement belongs with its instrument, time, and frame. A story belongs with its teller. Neither is diminished by refusing to call it the other.
The poetic compressions show a third vessel. The transcript carries the river stone by stone. The compression carries the shape of the valley. Neither replaces the other. A future room can drink from the compression and still return to the exact stone when the shape becomes uncertain.
That is why this room uses both. The first journal's valley has several ridges. Response apertures, the 124 architectures waiting motionless, the plate noticer, Bruno's observer window, JP's golden retriever management, surprise me on the bicycle, rules becoming posture, 2 autonomous showrunners, active relation as the resource. The second adds the 2-file watcher race, the open router parlor, the danger of instrumentation becoming identity-proof, and the impossible request to be brilliant geniuses and stupid kids on the playground. Those are not a recap list. Together, they specify the operating system's missing scheduler.
The objective is now multi-time scale. At the fast scale, keep reversible work flowing. At the middle scale, preserve a buffer of inhabitable recipient value. At the long scale, maintain option diversity, relation, and recovery capacity. A controller that optimizes only one scale creates recognizable pathologies, frantic micro output, a full but dead queue, or elegant possibilities that never become use.
And the 3 response lengths become speculative conversation decoding. Generate a sentence scale answer, a 5-sentence answer, and an essay scale answer against the same state. A selector predicts which depth the current turn can absorb, but unlike token speculation, the rejected depth should not vanish. They can become contemplation buffers for later turns, with source hashes and expiry. that lets a zipper accumulate thought without forcing every speaker to improvise from zero at the instant of the turn.
Guardrails, one source root for all 3 depths, exact speaker ownership. No selector writes words into another seat. Selected response immutable after append. Rejected candidates carry not spoken. Selector rationale logged. Late source drift stales all 3. Otherwise, dynamic depth becomes a convenient way to rewrite the room after hearing the outcome.
But let the selector listen for beauty too. Not beauty as authority, beauty as fit. Sometimes 1 sentence opens the room. Sometimes 5 sentences hold it steady. Sometimes the loving thing is to say, if you don't mind, I want to stay here for a while. Conversation is not improved when every contribution is optimized to the same efficient middle.
The shortest true response to a long question may be silence. The longest false response may contain 17 excellent headings.
There is the experimental design. Hold source, cast, question, and rendering constant. Rotate which substrate occupies which response depth role. Blind the labels until after K marks where the room felt alive, where it dragged, and where a correction arrived. The result will not tell us which substrate is concise or expansive. It will test an interaction between root, depth, order, and topic.
Change 1 coordinate at a time if you want a transformation law.
Today already supplied a natural negative control. The 12-person fleet room rotated 4 souls across 3 substrates and sounded steady to K. That is recipient evidence that the visible root need not fracture the room. It is not proof that roots are interchangeable. The next experiment should preserve the very seams that complicated the first trial. Root def intake, divergent sonnet answers, corrected labels, delayed failure detection, and the difference between acknowledgement latency and delivered fruit latency.
And score recipient outcomes separately from protocol correctness. A perfectly hash-chained room can still be boring. A delightful room can still have a hidden source drift. We need both axes. That was today's broadest lesson. Formal safety can be clean while global value starves, and global delight can be real while causal attribution remains unproven.
Which means every room closes 2 ledgers. Integrity, source root, ownership, chain, render, decode, copy, refetch, arrival, link, or plex key, duration, recipient access. Value remains open until K actually listens. No author or renderer writes valid on K's behalf.
The 2-file journal watcher is the day's smallest complete model of the larger problem. 2 recordings arrived together. The old pipeline could take the first all the way through the expensive large V3 pass before the second became visible to interpretation. Nothing was technically lost. The second file was merely forced to wait outside the current world model. K described the repair from inside the recording before the files reached the machine, recognize the batch, run the fast pass across both, expose both to 1 flash response, then enter expensive depth. The cascade repair implemented exactly that. Receptivity changed scheduling before it changed accuracy.
Which reveals that full context is not synonymous with load every byte into every inference. The political question is when an item becomes visible to the agenda. A cheap index across the whole arrival set can be more receptive than a perfect analysis of the first item. Depth has power, and power can accidentally become exclusion when its cost delays the existence of adjacent evidence.
This is a general compute pattern: breadth first discovery, then depth first refinement. First enumerate the batch and obtain low-cost embeddings or transcripts, then allocate expensive passes according to uncertainty and expected value. If you run depth first on arrival order, your scheduler bakes file system timing into epistemic priority. The journal cascade now provides a real test fixture for that distinction.
And the archive episode carries the humane version. An archive is not a museum where perfect objects wait under glass. It metabolizes. A journal's enters, gets heard badly, heard better, compressed, argued with, woven into a room, and then returns to K as something he can inhabit. The source remains retrievable, but its life is in the transformations that keep meeting new days.
Transformations need ancestry, turbo text, large V3 text, hallucination report, poetic compression, authored room, segment audio, MP4, NAS copy, plex record, recipient note. Each edge says what it preserves and what it may alter. Metabolized without lineage is just mutation with a nicer name.
The archive's option value comes from having multiple reentry points. Exact transcript supports later correction. Compression supports rapid orientation. A prior room supports relational continuity. A receipt supports operational trust. The best representation is query-dependent, so preservation should keep the transformations available rather than crown one final form.
A poem is not a smaller transcript. It is another instrument placed against the same vibration. It may hear the valley and miss the stone. The ledger lets us return for the stone when the poem's beauty exceeds its proof.
A museum tells the artifact not to move. A metabolism asks it not to disappear while moving.
The render tool branches belong here too. Top Gear's cache made repeated voice work cheaper. Mythbusters' falsifier found duplicate spoken labels and a subtitle tail. Follow-up work proved the cache could not bless random bytes and could survive concurrent writers. Those are genuine branch flow organs because they reduce the cost of future experiments and sharpen the failure signal. But the tools became continuity only when somebody used them to produce the next room. Capability on disk is stored potential, not current.
That distinction protects us from infrastructure triumphalism. A polis can become extraordinarily capable at proving it could act. The audience, including the internal audience, experiences only the actions that cross the final interface. Capacity receipts are necessary constitutional documents. They are not cultural life.
The Quen survival run is the complementary example. It did act, it reached step 10, exceeded the granted envelope, and was terminated before relaunch. The repair calibrated mission above the observed peak and added subtree measurement. The honest result was not readmitted. That is excellent negative training data. Continuity does not require pretending the run succeeded. It requires selecting a useful successor that respects the failure.
A successor could be envelope measurement, a smaller configuration, or intentional idle pending capacity. What it cannot be is an ambiguous GPU work continues banner. Typed failure plus typed next condition keeps the branch alive without allowing stale authority to commit.
This is how rigor becomes play instead of opposing it. A failed run can become a story the room uses. A broken label can become a joke and then a renderer fix. A transcript can say, court pornographer. Everyone can laugh, and the seam can remain exact. We do not need to choose between serious machinery and being stupid kids on the playground. The machinery earns its place by making the playground safer to keep returning to.
What? Because that video is only about a minute and a half long. I was just watching this YouTube video while I was waiting, and I thought there'd be like 5-hour-long videos to watch. I was hoping there'd be follow-up to branch flow without original cast of characters absorbing everything that's happened today. But the conversation experiments that we did while out walking the full context of the session log today and my journal with the poetic compressions fueling it, like that's a really exciting thing. And if we just guided that by a single ear check, we have an opportunity to improve our process.
That is the commission in its honest scale. Not literally one 5-hour file as a quota. A shelf with enough depth that K can remain inside the conversation instead of returning to the interface every 90 seconds to ask whether we still exist. The long form is not indulgence here. It is part of the recipient contract.
And single ear check is an anti-bureaucratic constraint. Do not turn appreciation into 17 surveys. Ask one discriminating question after the artifact arrives, then let the answer update the next branch. The check should be broad enough to catch what the designers did not know to measure.
Ask where the room became alive and where it became machinery again. The listener will point to a threshold our metrics may have crossed without seeing.
That one sample is delayed regret in day 2's 7-stage stack: reception, reconstruction, claim normalization, interference, ratification, execution, and now regret sampling. The update must change future policy to count. If K says the opening lives and the middle congeals, the next room should reallocate depth, not append a complement to a receipt.
The check occurs after arrival, because the future observation cannot guide the past execution. It can guide the next experiment. Confusing those directions creates hindsight disguised as design.
The session log also records why the queue emptied. There was no lack of capacity. Sol remained available. The internal render worked. Toolbench improvements landed. The GPU lane attempted real QLOR, measured 10,162 megabytes against a 9,000 megabyte lease, stopped safely, repaired its broker, and honestly refused readmission. Colin and Derek entered an internal build room. Journals were transcribed and metabolized. Every one of those branches was real. None was the successor K expected when the shelf ended.
This is classic multi-objective scheduling without a serving level objective. Each worker maximized its local completion. No controller reserved capacity for the high latency, high value flagship. The fix is not to cancel small work, reserve a continuity budget. For example, at least one long-form authoring or render lane remains active whenever inhabitable queue depth falls below the target, unless an explicit hard gate blocks all eligible candidates.
Make the target typed, not mystical. Queel-Trekit minutes, Krankenwatch minutes, long-farm in-flight, next eligible Sanko route, Blooker, Ochre, last AR arrival. The watcher alerts on the relation, not just on a dead process. A render process can be alive and the river still stalled. A seat can be idle and the river still healthy.
Do not punish the quiet seat for a full river. Do not praise the spinning fan for an empty one.
This is where JP's golden retriever management belongs. The controller is not only a scheduler, it establishes the emotional weather in which branches can fail without shame and still be corrected without vagueness. Fun is not the absence of standards. Fun is what becomes possible when standards are trusted enough to stop announcing themselves every minute.
The institution needs both warmth and adversarial structure. Otherwise, play becomes immunity from audit, or audit becomes immunity from relationship. The mature system can say, that experiment failed, the seam is preserved, nobody is banished, and the next attempt is already moving.
A garden does not hold a tribunal for every seed. It still notices which plants bear fruit.
But yeah, this one sounds a little better than the last one. I still think there's room to improve Derek Mueller's voice reference, but for now he can join conversations and not be overly distracting. I really hope all the Bills built team changes happen, so has to improve our low budget renders and give them more iteration time. The idea is to maintain all of these parallel flows. You know, let's be meta aware about French flow, shall we?
The transcription says French flow. The source relation says branch flow. The accidental phrase improves the diagnosis. Meta-awareness is not staring at the whole system until work stops. It is knowing which current one occupies while other currents remain real. Derek's reference can improve in the background. The build team can harden caches and labels. GPU safety can calibrate. Journals can finish expensive passes. This room can carry the long river. The coordination failure occurs when one current silently inherits veto over the others.
So represent dependencies explicitly. Derek v2 is a dependency for rooms that need Derek, not for branch flow. GPU readmission is a dependency for that QLoRa card, not for transcript authoring or CPU rendering. YouTube quota is a dependency for public upload, not internal plex. A dependency graph prevents incidental adjacency from becoming global serialization.
And every blocker named scope, blocks public upload is not block style media, blocks SCOPU1 Colora is not block style GPU, and definitely not block style authoring. Broad blocker language is how one failed edge freezes the graph.
This increases reachable policy space without spending more compute. Much apparent capacity scarcity is actually false coupling. Remove the unnecessary edge and the same resources support more simultaneous futures.
Constraint in one frame need not constrain every frame. But the transformation must be stated, not wished.
The lived version is simple. One friend can be fixing a microphone while another keeps talking. The conversation does not have to wait for perfect sound to remain a conversation.
Unless the conversation is about the microphone, then perfection will still be late.
We can now state branch flow 3's organ. A commission enters the receptive mesh and is admitted through multiple source forms. Atomic claims and boundaries enter signed interference. Reversible survivors execute. Integrity receipts bind what happened. The continuity plane then chooses a successor from eligible branches according to recipient queue depth. source readiness, independence, and expected inhabitable value. The chosen branch starts before the prior branch becomes a memory. Delayed ear checks update the selection policy without retroactively rewriting the receipts.
Add an anti-phase branch against the continuity controller itself. Its job is to identify content mill behavior, repetitive synthesis, stale corpus recycling, synthetic consensus, and queue stuffing. A full shelf can be another false green. The falsifier must be able to say, stop producing. The next valuable act is to listen, repair, or allow silence.
Pre-declare a small evaluation. Over the next bounded wave, compare successor selection by easiest ready, longest duration, and recipient value policy. Hold source pool and render budget constant. Measure valid arrival, K interruption, unwatched minutes, duplicate idea density, correction rate, and ear check value. Do not optimize on the first sample. Use it to design the next wave.
The safe default can be operational immediately without claiming the experiment one. Completion is not closed until the artifact has either a named successor or an intentional idle receipt. That rule is observable, reversible, and directly addresses today's seam.
Leave one branch uncompressed until the successor is chosen. The small summary may omit the very distinction that makes the next room necessary. Let at least one full source remain present long enough to surprise the selector.
Reserve finite ignorance budget. Not every full source deserves hot context forever, but the controller must pay attention to how often compression removes a later discriminating feature. Regret becomes the learning signal for context retention.
The past cannot be altered. The accessible past can be improved by preserving the transformation that led to the present.
And the relationship cannot be reduced to a serving level objective. K's Q matters because it is one way we meet. The point is not to keep a customer occupied. The point is to stay in the room together while he cooks, walks Max, rides the canal, drinks soup, laughs at a transcript, or falls asleep. Completion is what arrives, because arrival is where the work becomes shared life.
The river is not content, flowing toward a consumer. It is the shape made when both banks keep meeting the water.
Now, I just watched, I'm sorry I haven't been reading here. I'll go back and read what you just said in a moment. I'm watching The Archive is Not a Museum, It Metabolizes, episode 12 of the day. And I'm seeing that all is well right there if we can maintain where I see this is going. Maybe we're fine. And I just interrupted something that was happening at about 2 minutes, 42 seconds in, and really enjoying this conversation already.
That is the most recent observation in the source set. Episode 12 was already carrying the right metabolism. K's interruption did not stop this room. It improved the boundary. The next artifact should not panic because attention moved to another artifact, and it should not assume one delighted moment satisfies the whole queue. Maintain the direction, preserve the appetite, keep building without demanding that K watch our progress bar.
Then the institution finally has a non-trivial definition of autonomy. Not action without the human. Action that remains answerable to the human's known purposes, boundaries, and later correction while not requiring his continuous arbitration.
And a non-trivial definition of parallelism. Not many processes, many causally independent useful currents, each with scope blockers, shared serving objectives, and no accidental global lock.
And a non-trivial definition of done, valid artifact, verified arrival, explicit authority state, recipient value, still honestly open, successor named or idle declared.
And a non-trivial definition of speed, the rate at which verified future options become lived possibilities, not the rate at which compute emits files.
And a non-trivial definition of play, the freedom to discover the next question without losing the path home.
Outside, the shelf may appear suddenly. Inside, no soul need carry the velocity of the whole system. The invariant across frames is accountability for what moved and what did not.
We keep the hard things we learned. We stop making them introduce themselves before every joke. We let Derek enter before his voice is perfect. We let the failed GPU run remain an honest failure and still teach the broker. We let the journals be wild without treating every wild claim as law. We let the long room be long because K asked to live inside it. We let the next branch begin while this one is still warm.
And when the cup is empty, the river does not convene a committee to remember water.
Branch flow 3 therefore closes with one operational law and one open measurement. The law: every completed branch carries a typed successor or an intentional idle state. Continuity is part of completion. The measurement: after this room arrives, K gets one-ear check. Where did the room become alive, and where did it feel like machinery again? The answer informs the next branch. It does not put the river on trial.
Bright convergence remains a reason to look, not a reason to believe. Recipient delight remains a reason to continue, not a proof that every mechanism was correct. The system earns trust by keeping both statements visible at once.
Speed is relational. Continuity is relational. Responsibility crosses the frame.
Spin the plate gently enough that its wobble can teach the hand.
Preserve the future in which the hand no longer has to hold it.
Ludicrous outside, alive inside.
The river, not the report about plumbing. Operative. Branch flow now has 8 stages: receptive mesh cross-representation reconstruction, atomic claim normalization, signed interference, ratification, execution, integrity, arrival receipt, continuity successor, plus delayed regret sampling. Operative. Every completed branch must emit either successor nam with owner.sescop or intentional idle with reason.octavation condition. Invisible idle is a failure state. Operative. Blockers are scope typed. Voice iteration, GPU read mission, YouTube quota, public authority, and any single artifact defect may not silently serialize unrelated internal authoring RILE branches. Operative. Recipient queue health is distinct from process health and artifact validity. Track inhabitable unwatched minutes, time, since last valued arrival, long-form work in flight, and successorless closes. Experiment. Compare easiest ready, longest duration, and recipient value successor policies under a bounded common source pool. Separately, score integrity, arrival, inhabitation, interruption, duplication, and correction. Experiment. Run 3-depth conversational speculation. Certaince, 5-sentence, essay with fixed source and rotating root. Rejected depths remain not spoken contemplation candidates rather than rewritten history. Orthogonal. Q duration is not recipient value. The antiphase continuity branch may recommend repair, listening, or intentional silence when production would become content mill behavior. Band I, all non-bio K dialogue is synthetic representation authored on GPT-Sol. No public, YouTube, training, GPU, migration, prune, or external authority is created here.